So, Dr. Fishbein is currently an associate professor of medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. She has a strong interest in personalized medicine, including understanding the impact of germline predisposition genetics for endocrine tumor syndromes, as well as understanding neuroendocrine tumor development and metastatic disease. Since I've known her and well before that, she's consistently promoted patient-centered research in her work. She is the excellent chair of our Pheo Alliance Research Board and an active member of the Pheo Medical Advisory Board, and it's been a joy to work with her in those roles. Lauren is very well positioned to moderate our panel discussion on patient engagement and research. Turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. We're excited to talk about this topic, and we really envision this session being a dialogue for everyone. So we hope that you'll have questions for us and we can just chat about some things. So let's see here. Here we go. So we're going to start with introductions. So this is our panel. I'm just going to give everyone 1 to 2 minutes, kind of introduce yourself, your roles, and we'll start with Amanda.
Hi, I'm Düsing. I'm also a patient. I have a CHP mutation, and I've lived with metastatic disease now for 17 years. And then 11 years ago, we founded a foundation called the Paradifference Foundation. So we, it's just me and my mom. But every year we donate around $2 million to research within the field of, obviously, we focus on Paraganglioma research. And currently we have projects all over the world. Many of the researchers that are here today. And yeah, I live in London with my 2 children.
Perfect.
Good morning. I'm Dean Reuther. I'm a medical oncologist from Calgary. I'm a clinician. I've been in practice for 30 years and practiced across a number of different types of tumors. My interest and involvement in the care of patients with neuroendocrine tumors really started in about 2009 when there was recognition within our provincial program that we didn't have the clinical expertise to provide the kind of care that was needed for patients with neuroendocrine tumors. And I saw that as an opportunity to get more involved with this patient population. So my clinical focus over the last several years has shifted to the care of patients with endocrine and neuroendocrine tumors. I have practiced in GU, and I remember very well that story of discovering that this patient had a paraganglioma and not a renal cell carcinoma. And I remember thinking how exciting that was because of the response to treatment. And maybe this was the start of finding new treatments for patients. So it's been a privilege for me to be involved in clinical trials in this patient population, and I've really enjoyed this one. It's my first time attending it. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm Rory, Clifton-Bligh. I'm an endocrinologist from Sydney, Australia. I've practiced for about 25 years now, and I have a particular focus on hereditary endocrine disease, particularly the multiple endocrine neoplasias, including hereditary Pheochromocytoma syndromes. And like that, I'm passionate about exploring with patients new avenues of treatment and involvement in patients in research programs.
Okay, perfect. And yes, Linda. Oh yes, you were on the panel too. You should be up here. Sorry.
So you all know me already. I just want to say that as the Pheo Alliance, we've been really excited about patient involvement in research, and I think we had a hand in creating research with the survey that we've done and working alongside some very committed researchers to develop a survey and gather information which is going to be relevant to our work and hopefully to their work. We seek to collaborate on just kind of roles that patients can have in research. We seek to collaborate with researchers as partners on grant applications, which benefit us and also hopefully give the grant a better chance of succeeding. we are active as patient reviewers of grant applications. As a matter of fact, this year we have 2 board members who are going to be grant reviewers for the Department of Defense Congressionally Directed Program. We encourage people to participate in research by not promoting but making available information about clinical trials and other research opportunities for patients to participate. And we try to bring research knowledge to patients through webinars, things like this. We have something called Research Rookies, which try to translate articles into lay language. And I'm sort of very interested in promoting those kinds of patient involvement in research, but I also have, as a former researcher myself, a kind of nagging wondering whether in some ways does patient participation actually take away from research. In some ways they're compromising design perhaps, or making things take longer than they would have otherwise. So I would appreciate some kind of thought about that. And the other thing I want to say is when we're talking, you have to go to the podium in order to be recorded. So there'll be a little bit of getting up and down. So.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. All right, and okay, well, let's jump into it so we can have conversations. So we just wanted to talk about kind of the spectrum of research, because I think when we say, you know, do patients want to get involved in research, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind are clinical trials, but there are so many different ways to be involved depending on what your interests are and your comfort level are. So I would start with biobank contributions. So a lot of expert centers that treat especially rare disease, but really all sorts of different cancers will have registries at their institutions. So that's where maybe you can give an extra blood sample, or if you have surgery, your tumor can be put into research protocols. It doesn't usually involve a lot other than that. And so it's a kind of easy way to really participate. And for rare disease, we need as many samples as possible. And so it's extremely valuable to participate in this. It allows us to do more global studies with larger numbers. And so I think it's a great way to participate. There's also surveys. So as Linda said, Pheo Alliance, but also tons of other people are doing kind of survey type projects looking at what is the quality of life of someone living with Pheo. Is it different for people with head and neck disease versus other disease? What about the tumors that make hormones versus the ones that don't? How about screening? Is there anxiety associated? So there's lots of ways to participate that way too, to kind of have your voice heard for how you are dealing with the disease. There are clinical trials, which there'll be a talk later today talking about that in particular. Linda kind of mentioned helping trial design. So I would argue that it is never a bad thing to have input from other people. And now a lot of research institutions are requiring patients and caregivers to be part of the study team. And I've always found it helpful. And I saw everybody else here nodding to that too, to have that perspective. And it's not that we're expecting you to understand how to run a clinical trial, for example, but it's input. Is this reasonable, what's being suggested? Is this doable? How does it, make a person feel in this particular circumstance? And sometimes the questions that come are unexpected and do change, how we might design something. So I think that input is extremely helpful in a lot of different ways. Guidelines members. So as we're writing more and more guidelines, we're also trying to have patient and caregiver perspective on those too, because the recommendations we make for clinical care should have that voice there as well. And so there are opportunities to be part of guidelines as well. Grant reviewers, which we can maybe talk a little more detail about. And this is also another way that certain organizations like the Department of Defense, I think some foundation grants also have patients on the sections that read the grants. And that can be challenging. It can be overwhelming if you're not familiar with the particular science, but it's how relevant is this to patient care? we want it to be relevant. Does this sound important for people who deal with this particular disease? So there are ways to be involved that way as well. And to be honest, for rare disease, it helps advocate, especially at DoD, for certain types of, disease processes or cancers that might otherwise be overlooked potentially by whoever's on a panel. So having that voice can be really helpful as well. And then if none of that is interesting, or even if it is, there are ways to volunteer with your expert skills. Like, let's say somebody really knows how to make a website for something. Helping volunteer for that for research programs can be really helpful. Helping volunteer for social media or for advertising a particular study. There are a lot of ways that maybe someone has expertise that can really help research projects. Raising money and donate. Can't say that enough, but it's really important because funding overall is difficult and oftentimes, especially in the rare disease space. So if it's an expertise of yours to talk to people, share your experience, if you have the money to donate or know people who can, that's always helpful as well. And then advocate for federal funding in whatever country you live in, because just in general, there's a lot of cutting of federal funds towards research. And so being that voice, sending letters to your representatives in the government, just to say in general, funding is really important. That is also extremely helpful. So this is kind of it for slides. I have one more slide with just questions to have conversation about, but I really want to open it up to all of you. And we're all here to answer questions. We can also talk more about different experiences and things that relate to these topics as well. So I don't know if anyone has questions, and we'll repeat them into the microphone so that it can be heard if you have. Please.
If the tissue wasn't originally biobanked during surgery and it's been maybe 8 years, can you go back and get that tissue and ask for it?
Yeah, so the question is, if the tissue hasn't been biobanked originally and it's been 8 years since surgery, so the clinical samples are usually kept, it depends on each institution, but I think around 10 years or longer. And those clinical samples are usually in paraffin embedded blocks and formalin fixed, but there's a lot we can do with those tissues. And so most biobank registries also have a part that say, if a person volunteers for the biobank, it allows us access to the clinical tissue for any prior surgeries. So it depends on the particular registry if it allows for that, but I think most registries do.
Do you go back to the surgeon, or how would you say, oops, I don't think it depends, so how would we say?
Oh, yes, so how do we accomplish that? So usually it'll be a researcher at that institution that asks for it, or it can be a researcher at a different institution. If you've now registered for a biobank somewhere else, then there's forms that you fill out clinically for HIPAA purposes to allow us access to that old sample, basically.
And I've had some personal experience from this as well.
Do you want to use the microphone?
No, my first, so I live in the UK now, and my first surgeries were in Switzerland and then in Stockholm, and I ended up in that situation where and actually I contacted the pathologist, and there it's probably different in different countries, but you are allowed access to your own tissue samples. I've also found that I've had quite a lot of ablation treatment where they had no intention of actually taking a biopsy initially because it wasn't needed for the treatment itself. But then as a patient, you can always ask, can I just make sure that we're actually taking a sample of this, and where is it being stored? And the way that it's stored, you can advocate as well for. And a lot of places, in my experience, are also quite okay with you saying that you want this to be held until it's research that's done in certain areas. It's just good to know that as a patient, it obviously depends on your centers, but you usually have more saying in it than at least that I thought initially.
Question about the biobanks. How does this work? Is it shared? Because you're from the United States, right? So I'm wondering, you were talking about multiple. So I'm just wondering how this information is shared, or how do we know which biobank to contribute to?
Yeah, great question. So,
Share mine too.
Yeah.
Anybody.
so just to repeat the question, and then maybe Rory, I don't know if you want to comment on this one. The question is, how do you know which biobank to contribute to, and is that shared among different places? I don't know if you want to talk about like A5 collaborations and just use the mic for.
That's fine.
Okay, so usually most institutions have their own biobank because they need ethics approval to do that. And so you store the samples locally most of the time. We thought a lot about having an international registry that we could store samples, but that costs so much money that it just was not feasible. So it's usually stored locally. We now have networks. So in Europe, there's a network called the NSAT, and in the United States, Asia, Australia, actually all of North America and South America, we have the A5. So it's the American, Australian, Asian, I forgot age, I think, Adrenal Alliance, 5 A's. So the A5 and NSAT, each institution has their own registry, but then we have legal agreements that allow us to share samples and data for different studies. So there's lots of examples, but I'll just use my own. We did a study where we collected DNA samples from patients' blood to do genetic analysis on. And we have 9 centers in the US and Australia that have contributed samples for phase 1. We got over 2,000 samples shared that way through the 9 centers, along with the matching clinical information. And then now we're hoping to do kind of phase 2 and include even more sites in Europe and other places as well. So there are ways to share that way. Usually I recommend people start with their like home institution if they have one that has a registry, but there are some registries that allow enrollment even from people who are not their personal patients as well. It's a little individualized, but you can reach out to any of the, maybe PPA can, suggest a researcher close-ish to you to work on.
So it's an excellent point. There are a number of different styles of biobanks too. So as Lauren said, the DNA from a person's blood that's often used at the outset of their journey for genetic diagnosis, that is often stored in genetic repositories rather than biobanks per se. So at my institution, we've got many hundreds of DNA samples stored, but it's in a location separate from our tissue bank. Banking is different in different institutions, and I agree with Amanda that really it should be under the control of the person who's donated their sample, and certainly in pathology that's true, but in a lot of tissue banks it's altruistic, so you donate your sample to a biobank for the purposes of research, but to a certain extent the participant loses some of the control about what happens to their sample once it's in the biobank. And that's often part of the consent process because if we have to go back each time to the participants saying, do you want your sample used in this particular research project, it can get a little unwieldy. However, there are now the next generation of biobanks, and this is the liquid biopsy biobanking, which Rodrigo Toledo spoke about at our meeting upstairs, and a number of other centres throughout the world are doing liquid biopsy studies. These are almost living biobanks, so you longitudinally are donating samples to active research projects. And I think that's a real opportunity for patients and researchers to come together and say, well, how can we design something that extends knowledge and looks to future therapy. Now, liquid biopsies have their own challenges. Essentially, they're just blood tests, but they may be not informative for neuroendocrine tumours of low tumour volume. They've very dramatically accelerated research. Dean, you probably have more to comment about liquid biopsies in oncology than I do, but in my opinion, they've rapidly accelerated oncologic research and development of new therapies and therapy guidelines. But they do fundamentally rely on how quickly the tumour is being shed into the bloodstream. Tumour DNA is being shed into the bloodstream. Again, just one final thing, if I can. The A5 network also successfully collaborated to generate the A5 SDHB data set, which was run by my good friend and colleague Richard Tothill down at the University of Melbourne, with what did he say, 4 terabytes of data?
Yeah.
I mean, an immense amount of data generated off the back of genome sequencing of tumours from nearly 80 people from around the world with Pheochromocytoma, Paraganglioma related to SDHB. So these initiatives are enormously powerful and they generate a huge amount of data, and that data is made available for other researchers to use and explore. So absolutely, I'm in full support of BARVIC.
Any other questions? All right, then I'm going to go to the panelists. So maybe I'll start with you. Anything that you would suggest in terms of challenges of participating in research or, benefits?
I think one of the most important things is the fact that we truly see patients as partners in their care, and we empower patients to ask the right questions. So one of the things we do in the cancer program in Calgary, where I'm based, is as people come in the door and see us for a consultation, we try to prep them ahead of time with, these are some of the questions you might want to ask of your oncologist. And one of those is there a clinical trial happening at the center right now that I might be interested in learning about or that I might be eligible for? We have gotten into discussions about how we incorporate questions like contributions to biobanks and tissue banking. I would like to see a situation where people actually have to opt out by a signature for participation, make it easier for all of us. There would be huge issues around privacy and such with that. But I think we need to do everything we can to make it easier for people to opt in than opt out. And the more we can empower patients to ask those kinds of questions, the better off we will all be. Information is power. It helps us. It helps us to help you. It helps you and your families to understand what it is you're dealing with, what it is you're facing. And so any opportunity that a patient is given to contribute to any of these that you've heard about, whether it's simply sharing your clinical information or access to tissue samples, access to blood samples, participation in health research studies, health services research studies that help us to understand the consequences for patients of the disease they live with and the things we do to them. Those are critically important. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we have some questions that maybe can ask the panel to talk about. So Linda, do you want to maybe talk about research bootcamp training programs or any other topic that?
Sure. So I think one of the ways that one can enhance the possibility or the promise of positive benefits of research and kind of, on the other hand, decrease any potential negative impact of patients in research is preparation. So both on the part of the patient to be prepared to engage in research, which is to gain a kind of understanding of what the research is about and what some of the issues and constraints are on researchers and what the potential is and what's maybe an unrealistic view of what's possible. And on the researcher's part, kind of recognizing the need to respect and educate patient contributions, gaining skills in how to translate medical jargon to actual language that people can understand, and and to listen, to be good listeners. So there are some opportunities for patients to gain skills that are relevant to research, and one of those is currently being put on by INCA, the International Neuroendocrine Tumor Society, which involved 8 weeks or 8 months, once a month, meeting of Zoom-based presentations and discussions on research skills, which, to be honest, wasn't that useful. No, I didn't know say that. Which had potential, but I think was kind of at almost an academic level and not really how it got translated into what you as a patient could actually do in your community and connect with researchers on a kind of action-oriented way. So I think it's useful if you are interested in contributing at a level that, you know, maybe goes beyond participation and kind of one-offs and being involved in a ongoing project or at the initial levels of the project is to figure out what resources are available. And there's some really good online programs, and working with the researchers to kind of build their skills would be a kind of very interesting and useful thing to do.
Okay, Amanda, I was just gonna end here by asking from your experiences and with your foundation, you know, how do you see the interaction?
Well, I think that you showed that slide to see where are you comfortable to contribute. I mean, that was exactly where I was when we got involved. It was when my tumor spread to my spine, and we were at I was at the Mayo Clinic, and I met with my doctor, and I said, okay, I know we're doing like a slow approach to this treatment, and I agree with that, but I just want to know if I wanted to get rid of all the cells like in my body, what treatment am I turning down? And he was like, essentially, there's not really anything out there. You know, that was the gist of it that I heard, at least. So then we asked, well, what research are you doing in the area? And the day after, we were in their research lab instead with Dr. Jim Nahr, who's still involved in the field, and also actually a Paraganglioma patient, just by chance, which is amazing. And that's when we kind of looked at this and said, okay, where can we contribute? I don't have a medical background. I'm a patient, but also I work full time, and as I now have 2 small kids, I have so much respect for patient advocacy groups and who work with the engagement in the community, but I knew that's not where I would be able to contribute. But we said that we do think that we're able to raise a lot of money, and we're able to financially contribute to a field that is, underfunded, because it is a rare disease. And when we started 10 years ago, it was even more so, because it was more difficult to draw the link between why should people who, unless we all care about Paraganglioma, Pheochromocytoma, obviously, but for people who don't have any association to the disease, how do you even present that as why should I be giving money to this? And now I think that's actually become a lot easier. Just this spring, we've, so it just says that how we finance is that we really looked at saying, okay, the other funding that was coming in, what were the gaps that were left from that? And one of the things that we saw was that there was not enough collaboration, we believed, at that time. So we decided to say that anyone who was presenting a project, which was a new collaboration between institutes that were already collaborating, that got priority through in our grant process. We also saw that a lot of funds were given on very short notice. But then we have a privately owned business, and we believe in a long-term view. And if you compare it to a company that has quarterly, annual reports, and they're always having to look at a short-term horizon, we kind of looked at that as the same thing, where some of these things, and I get that if you have fund restrictions, you work with what you have, but we could contribute with longer funding horizons. So instead of saying you needed to show us results after 6 months to then get more money, we give 3-year grants a lot of the time. We've even given 5-year grants instead. And then we do more, instead of saying, we also don't restrict exactly what the money is spent on. Also similar business approach, right? You would say, what do we want to achieve? You employ the right people to do it, but you have to give them freedom in how to do it. And we do not have the background to micromanage any of these excellent researchers out there, and we shouldn't want to either. So we kind of took that approach to it. And what's really interesting, and for me as a patient, really optimistic, is that now this spring, for example, we made an attempt to fundraise larger outside because we've gotten a lot of funding also from people who have, who wanted to help us on this endeavor and who trust that we're spending money in the right way. But now we tried fundraising to fully external parties just on the basis of that paraganglioma research, because of the hypoxia factor in it, is actually can be really instrumental in knowledge for all types of cancers. And it worked really well. So we actually had a health tech fund that decided to contribute 5% of their carry to our foundation now for the coming 5 to 7 years, and that was just from one meeting. So I feel like this, for anyone who wants to get involved in fundraising, the storyline of presenting why should you even be funding into this research has become dramatically easier. I mean, obviously, I did it together with the researchers who were able to explain that link. I wasn't doing it myself. But and another thing I just want to say on financial funding is that we funded quite large sums, but the actual sums needed to make a difference in a lot of projects is a lot lower than what we as patients think, because we look at federal funding, we look at total percentage of GDP spent on healthcare, and we kind of feel as like patients or as normal people that there's no way that we can ever make a difference. But the actual projects are sometimes come to us they're not always of huge amounts. So anything that you can do is worthwhile doing, and it is worthwhile obviously then giving it on to, you choose where you want it to go. If you care about patient advocacy and that's where you want to fund more, that's great, do that. If you want to fund into research, then find a partner who doesn't work with overhead costs and gives the money to research. That's really up to you, but it's much lower thresholds than what I as a patient thought of initially. So I think that's just fun.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I know we're on time, on the budget with time here. So thank you, all of you, for great points. Thank you for all your questions as well. So thanks.